back, they are evaluated, and then they are given to a further team who checks this data. Every telescope is different. You need to correct for the characteristics of each telescope, put all that together so that you get a telescope as large as the Earth. And this process needed also several months of hard work, assessment, iterations, until people were sure, okay, this is the data that now we can begin to image. We can extract the information from this precious data, which occupied 6 cubic meters of disk, as I said, to get something like the image you have just seen now. And to know how you extract this information and you get from that, my colleague Monika Mosiwrocka will show us.
You may wonder how this image was made in the first place. Event Horizon Telescope data is like incomplete puzzle set. We actually only see pieces of the real true image. And then we have to fill in these gaps of these missing pieces to construct the physically possible image that is actually matching our data. This is actually a very difficult process. Therefore, the imaging process has been split into several phases. At first, at the very beginning, we were working on this imaging completely alone, each of us. This was a remarkable, almost life-changing experience to see an image of a black hole shadow popping out on the screens of our ordinary laptops. Next, we formed independent teams that worked completely independent from each other to repeat the imaging process. This was a very necessary, important step because we wanted to get rid of the human bias as much as possible. And in the last phase, which took the longest time, the imaging was done very, very carefully via very careful scientific analysis. So what have we learned from the images, and not just from the images, also from the data that are lying underneath this image? So first of all, we have observed this source for 4 days. Over the 4 days, the ring is there. The image looks almost exactly the same. We have also measured the size of this ring. Over 4 days, the size is always the same. It doesn't change. We have also measured the contrast between the ring itself and the central darkness. And the contrast is as large as it is expected for the black hole shadow. But there is one more very peculiar thing about this ring. It's not really a full ring. It actually is much brighter at the bottom side. Why is that? Our models told us immediately that this kind of structure can be only formed if something in the source is rotating. What is rotating? It could be the black hole, but also the matter around it, or both can be rotating. At the moment, the images are not yet sharp enough to actually estimate or calculate the exact speed of this rotation. But these images give us a sense of the direction of the rotation, which is clockwise in the sky. So to summarize, our images, our data tell us that we are looking at the shadow of the black hole, which has been predicted by all the models of the black holes that we have developed over the last few decades. And now Anton Zenzus will share some final remarks on the current state and the future of the Event Horizon Telescope. Thank you.
So my job now is to put it all together for you. The Event Horizon Telescope is a very ambitious project, but one with a very clear goal. We want to image, for the first time, the central black holes in the galaxy M87 and in the Milky Way. Today, now, 6 papers are appearing in the Astrophysical Journal Letters, a special edition, that show the image and all the discussion that is needed to convince our scientific colleagues. And in a few days, the data from our observations will be made public so that scientists anywhere in the world can verify our results. So how have we made this happen? We had to assemble a fleet, a capable fleet of the best and most sensitive millimeter wave radio telescopes in the world, combined through supercomputers to form one large radio telescope. We had to organize a team that now numbers to more than 200 scientists from many institutions around the world. This is a truly global collaboration. We cannot name all the people that are participating in this, but representative for all of them, I want to recognize Colin Lonsdale, Director of Haystack Observatory, and together with me, co-chair of the EHT Collaboration Board. He represents, together with our other friends here, the global partnership that we have, all the people that now are listening elsewhere that work together in this project. The preparation for these observations took a long time. I've spoken this morning to somebody who started 40 years ago building sub-millimeter telescopes. And so you can say several decades of preparation went into what in 2017 was for the team a very, very difficult, a complicated experiment to perform. This experiment was successful. This story is not a story of one hero. Instead, there are many heroes to this story. I'm proud to work with these people, and we salute their achievement. A number of them are here in the room today, ready to meet you later. So in Europe, how were we able to play a leading role in this endeavor? Foremost, it is through combining forces. We've brought together astronomers, observers, theoreticians, and facilities. Together, we in fact were able to make a much better result than we would have been able to do individually. Of course, in Europe, we have direct access to some of the most powerful millimeter wave radio telescopes. The Institut Radioastronomie Millimétrique ERAM's 30-meter telescope was a crucial element in the north. ALMA, the Atacama Large Millimeter Array, where the European Southern Observatory is a key partner, was absolutely a game changer. It enabled us to get the sensitivity and the resolving power to make these images happen. Scientists in Europe for decades have collected the capabilities, have developed methods, have acquired the excellent skills that were needed to participate in the scientific process in this project in all places. And last, the technical development capability that we have to build instrumentation, state-of-the-art instrumentation that we need, is second to none here in Europe. Lastly, the public funds, the taxpayer money that was spent on our basic research here, both from national resources, but also from the European Union, from the European Research Council and from RadioNet, was crucial in making this excellence happen. We appreciate that very much, and we hope we can come back. So where are we going from here? M87 in the bag. We're confident that very soon we'll complete the analysis of Sagittarius A star. We will go back to observe, and so please stay tuned. We'll come back. We are already underway improving the array. Foremost, ERAM's expanded NOEMA array that they will soon finish will again be a game changer for our trade. ALMA will offer us improved capabilities. And the Greenland Telescope and perhaps the African Millimeter Telescope project will make critical contributions to improving the quality of the EHT. With all of this, we're well placed to go into the next step of this journey. I think that we will be able to confirm a lot of the science that we're expecting. But much more important, we will be able, with this machine, to make discoveries of the unexpected. And that's the most fascinating in science. I personally like to say that I will think of a time before and after I saw for the first time this image. You mentioned this also. Today, I believe for all of us, marks the beginning of the day after for all of us. Thank you very much for your support, and thank you for your interest in our science. Now we will be ready to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you much for these presentations, and I dare say our press room will always be open for such extraordinary announcements. Now we can turn to your media questions. Let me point out that we've published abundant not only press material and words, but more importantly, audiovisual material on the Commission website. May I please ask you to introduce yourselves by name and media, starting in the middle?
Thank you very much. My name is Nicholas Wallace. I'm Policy Editor at Science Business. My question is for Commissioner Moedas. You said that this is the most excited you've been since you took office in 2014. My question is, do you expect any more excitement before your term ends? And if not, given that this was an international project that the Commission contributed to, what should be next for the EU and international collaboration in science? What do you think the next big thing should be for the next Commissioner? Thanks.
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, I think that this is really the pinnacle. I mean, I had exciting moments, exciting political moments, exciting when I was able to put forward to the College of Commissioners a proposal for 100 billion euros for the next science program. That really made my heart beat very much and made me more nervous about it at the time in a positive way. When then we went to the Parliament and the Council and we discussed, and a couple of weeks ago we achieved really something unique, is that we had that agreement with the countries and the Parliament for the content of that program of the future. And so one of the things that is in that program answers your question, which is that is linked between the citizens and science, and how important is that. And so we want to define this idea of the missions, the mission-driven science, because we want European citizens to feel connected. And that connection that happened here today, it's a proof of that. You know, I've never seen this room so full, or if I've seen it, was not for positive reasons or for reasons of crisis, and not for positive things. And it's so refreshing to come here, to see so many people, to see people clap. I mean, it's very rare in a press room to have people clapping. And so I think that is a sign for politicians that you should look at science in Europe as really the engine of growth and the only way forward to be the center. And so in terms of international collaboration, and I've said it so many times, I really believe that this is all about the European program to be open to the world. I mean, we are discussing with countries like Canada, New Zealand, we're discussing around the world to have people that want to be part of the European program. Because the European program, as the history of Europe, is not about Europe. It's about getting people together. It's more than Europe. We are bigger than that. And that's what makes Europe be at the center stage. And so I think there's really for the next couple of years, that will be the mission. The mission is to get everybody on board in a place that is quite unique. You know, I mean, there's not a lot of places in the world where you have the funding that we have for fundamental science. We have Jean-Pierre Bourguignon sitting there with the European Research Council. I mean, that's quite unique, and so I'm proud of that. And yes, today is really a proud moment.
Yes, Natalia?
Thanks for the question. My name is Natalia Drozdiak. I'm with Bloomberg. I was hoping that you could help us understand a bit what impact this discovery has on our understanding of conventional physics laws and how that's going to change now, especially with Albert Einstein's theory of relativity. Thank you.
So, you know, theory is eagerly waiting for confirmations. And Einstein's theory of relativity is the one that we know best and the one that has so far passed all the tests. And this is another very important test. This is the first ever image, and this gives us great confidence that relativity, as the one we understand in the strong field regime, where curvature is very, very strong, actually follows exactly what Einstein predicted.
If If you look at the literature, there are a lot of ideas for alternatives of black holes, and this is something you finally can actually test. We only just starting to do this. We can now say it's not a wormhole, for example, but many other things we will test in the future, but it can be done now. Now it becomes experimental science. And we have gravitational waves, and we have pulsars, all testing gravity in an area, in a regime, which has been inaccessible before. And so I think this really transforms the study of gravity in a fundamental way. Really different methods, different scales.
Thank you. Gentleman here in the front. You can take a mic on your side, in the seat. Now.
I'm Davide Castelvecchi from Nature magazine. How many questions do I get?
Can we start with one and then we'll vary it?
Okay. Can you tell us if you found any information about Sagittarius A star?
Okay. I was supposed to say that. We actually focused all our attention on M87 when we saw the very first results, because we knew this one's going to be awesome. The issue with Sagittarius A star is 1,000 times smaller, it's 1,000 times closer, so it has the same shadow size, but it's also 1,000 times faster. So if you want to take an image of that source, it's like taking an image of a toddler which moves around for 8 hours and try to get a still image. While M87 is a big bear, 1,000 times slower, hibernating there, not moving much within these 8 hours. So that makes it much easier. We were just lucky that M87 was so large. It could have been much smaller. We didn't know that before. And so once we saw that, we focused everything on that one. So, we'll still take a little more time to work on Sagittarius star.
We may come back to you later, time permitting. I think I saw some other show of hands. Yes, back there. Markus first, and then in front of you.
Markus Becker with Der Spiegel. I see that the black hole seem to behave nicely and follow the predictions, but maybe you can explain to us what kinds of new insights you have gained and how they form the basis for possible new research and new insights in the future. Thank you.
So far, our observation is actually exactly what we have expected. But I think there will be more possibilities in the future to investigate the behavior of this black hole. We basically would have to take movies, not just static images. Yeah. We also can learn something about the jet formation. This supermassive black hole is very famous for its huge kiloparsec scale jets. So now we know how this jet is actually coming out from the black hole. So this is a huge new insight of how relativistic jets are produced.
Thank you. Then we had a question right in front of Markus. There? Yeah? No? Okay, well, maybe while you continue thinking about questions or we come back to nature, we also have a number of people following us on social media and online, and they also had the opportunity to ask us questions, so I'll take a couple of those. Firstly, how can you take photos without light?
Well, radio is also light. The radio waves as light as the eye that enters into these detectors we have here, which are called eyes. We use the light, the waves that come from the remote black hole region in such a quite tricky way, because the same light that arrives to the Earth, the same wave comes to all the different telescopes, and we trap this front of light in our computers. We can then reproduce and play back that, but this is also the radio light, which is also the same light that comes into the mobile phones and all that. We are working in the electromagnetic spectrum. Then we can use this light to see the black holes too.
What we see in the image is actually light that is produced by plasma around the black hole. It's true that we cannot see the black hole. It's black, so you cannot see it. But we see its shadow that is being cast on this glowing plasma. So we are actually taking a picture of light.
one little detail, we think that the black hole is actually really engulfed in an optically thin, transparent, glowing fog of radio-emitting material. And so the fact that you see nothing in the center is actually quite significant.
Then we'll take another question, which I think is rather directed at Commissioner Moedas, which is how will the EU support astronomy, that we're now all very fascinated about, in the next EU research funding program?
I think first we support it in the name of our new program. You see, Event Horizon, Horizon Europe. I never thought about that before, but I think it's a good one. I think that the way, it's very important that Europe keeps on being the leader of fundamental science in the world. I mean, that's where we are at our best. And so when we approached on this proposal for the countries and for the Parliament to go from 13 billion euros for the European Research Council to 17 billion euros of the European Research Council, that's exactly about fundamental science. And that's exactly to put this priority as a European priority. Because if we can differentiate there, I think that we can differentiate for the future of our children. Because what I love about fundamental science, and I think that's the question from the journalist over there, which was, but what do you take from here? What are the impact? And the things that we don't know, the so many impacts that these will have in the future. I think that it's interesting to look at the people that are young now, the very young ones, and think the impact that they will see from these in 50 years, and the fact that we don't know. And that's something that is for the good of Europe and for the good of the world. So I think that if there's a place in the world that invests in fundamental science, it's us, and we should keep doing that for the future. So on the program Horizon Europe, we will keep investing very heavily on fundamental science.
Thank you. Of course, Anton?
From my perspective, and that is that it is very important to see that Europe is investing in the great brains. And at the same time, it's also very important to see that we have in Europe this technological and this edge with our facilities. And I will say that the support that we've had from the Union in actually making these facilities accessible to pan-European scientists has been very important. And even more important has been the seed funding that we have received so that the technology development can be done together at various institutions. And so it's the balance of investing in the individual talent, the brains, and investing into state-of-the-art infrastructures that really sets us apart.
Thank you. Let's come back to questions in the room. Yes.
Hello, Adi Nouwen from Astroblog Netherlands. I have a question about the accretion disk of black holes. All black holes seem to have an accretion disk. Did you try to have an image of that accretion disk too? And how do I see the accretion disk compared to this image? Is it outside of this horizon, or I don't know?
So, as you correctly said, these black holes are not in vacuum. They are surrounded by matter, and matter naturally folds and circles around it. Now, in this very image, the accretion disk is essentially as my hand. We're seeing it almost face on. And so it happens that matter that rotates in particularly in clockwise direction, will be pushing towards us. It's all of its emission, and this is why the bottom line is more bright than the top part, because it's what is called Doppler beamed. It's more intense because of a relativistic effect. So you can imagine that there is matter going around in a clockwise in a kind of accretion disk. The disk is not thin as we normally see in science fiction. It's a very thick accretion disk, and the simulation that you will find online will clarify this a bit better.
I would like to add here that it is okay to, this image can have different interpretation, and it is possible that we are actually, that this ring is actually the inner edge of the accretion disk.
Or the inner edge of the jet. That's where it starts. The problem that we have is that the light bending actually blends everything together. So when you look at low radio frequencies, you see the jet. As you go to high frequency, you get closer and closer to the event horizon. That's why we went to this high frequency, because that's where we actually start engulfing the entire black hole. That's where we can resolve the black hole, but that's where the innermost region is, and then everything gets blended together by light bending. So if you look again at the simulations, then you get a much better idea of what we think there is.
For the Spanish news agency Agencia F, does the black hole actually has a name other than the black hole of the M87 galaxy?
It didn't have a name, and in analogy to the other source that we study, Sagittarius A star, we just used this short version and called it M87 star, which doesn't mean it's a star, but just, the star actually means it's a very exciting source. It's one of the most exciting sources in M87. So.
As an amusing note, there is an Hawaiian name which has been associated and proposed for this black hole. So we'll actually have a proper name besides just a number.
Thank you. It's a good idea for a contest, though. Yes, back here, down here. Push the button and wait until it turns red. Yeah.
Koen Wouters, VRT Belgian Television. Have you found something which was unexpected or contradicted Einstein's relativity theory?
Unfortunately not. I think it was mind-blowing to see that in the first place. Had it been completely different from our expectations, we would have had to puzzle for like 2 more years to really, see had we done something wrong. Of course, at some point, you hope to find something that you did not expect in your simulations. By now, everything seems to fit perfectly. Actually, amazingly perfect. I should say, actually, Monica published, shockingly, she published a paper 2016. If you just convolve it to what we observe today, it's almost what we see now.
Thank you. Any further questions in the room? Yes?
Hello, Dr. Lorenzen, Deutschlandfunk. Can you really exclude any possible, maybe remotely possible alternative explanation? Or could it be, for instance, connected to the area where the jet is launched?
Actually, no, we cannot exclude. There are many alternatives to black holes, and there are many black holes in other alternative theories of gravity. What we are doing right now is excluding some of them. For instance, wormholes, as Aino has mentioned. We can exclude boson stars, which is also a very popular alternative. There are other alternatives which are more subtle and will require future observations. But what we see is consistent with Einstein's, and that's the simplest explanation. All of other explanation requires some more exotic explanation that would be difficult to explain with astrophysics, for instance, but are still allowed by the theory.
One little addition, we ran our simulations, actually all kinds of physical scenarios. So we had actually disk-dominated, jet-dominated, emission would come from all over the place, and turned out it almost always looked the same because of the light bending. That is a dominating effect. So, we simulated all of that, and wherever it comes from, the GR wins and sort of makes that shadow. That was actually the predictions and seemed to work out very nicely.
Okay, we'll take another question from social media. Are there any other galaxies that we know of where we might be able to observe black holes?
Yes, they are, and they are in our list. I mean, these galaxies and Sagittarius star are very strong. As long as we develop our telescopes to go to bigger collecting surfaces, which make us more sensitive to the photons coming from the universe, we will tick our list and check for the next ones.
The problem is if you want to resolve the black hole, you have to go to higher resolution, and you need a telescope larger than the Earth. And that you can only do from space. And so watch for some papers in the next couple of weeks or so, which will describe how you could do this.
Do we have any final questions? Yes, the gentleman back there. You have a microphone and
Julian Moore, just a European citizen, astonished by what you have achieved. My congratulations. I simply wanted to ask, you did some simulations to give you some expectation of what you would be looking for in your results. According to the parameters of your modeling, did it give you any insight into the other parameters of the black hole, such as its magnetic field or its angular momentum? Did it shed any light on the generation of the jets? Pun intended.
citizen.
So, yes, thank you for your question, citizen. That's very, very important. Rotation of the black hole is very difficult quantity to measure. And because of this blending of the light coming either from the jet or the accretion disk, it's very difficult for us, and this is something we discussed in the papers, to measure exactly how rapidly the black hole is spinning. But we think it is spinning because otherwise it would not make sense in terms of the energetics of the jet. And so we think it's spinning. And actually, if you want to ask, well, what is the spinning direction? We think it's pointing away from us. That's our best guess at the moment. And learning about magnetic fields, that's something that we are working on. But right now, we don't have a conclusive answer yet. Again, these are much higher, much more difficult quantities to measure, and we hope with the future observation to nail down also this information.
I would like to add here that at the moment we have a sense of rotation. So this is something that I mentioned, that it is clockwise on the sky. So this is something that we are certain about.
I may add on the magnetic fields that these data have still treasures waiting for us. We have obtained the total intensity images, but we are working also in the polarized light, which is also in the data. And when we learn about the polarized light, we also learn about the magnetic fields. This is one of the next things in our to-do list.
Thank you all. We will be closing this press conference shortly. Before I invite Commissioner Moedas to formally and officially close the press conference, let me, of course, thank our speakers here and all of you for being here today. I would also like to thank our interpreters and technicians, because it's not every day that they have to translate such a scientific language and also put up all this show. Our scientists will actually be with us still afterwards, so if journalists belatedly think of any questions, they're welcome to approach them. And with that, Commissioner, the floor is yours for the closing remarks.
Just a word of thanks to everyone for this amazing moment, but a word of thanks for the courage, because, you know, it's not easy for the scientists to take the risk. I mean, you took the risk of being here today, and that is something that is important for Europe, that you take the risk to be here, you take the risk to be in this moment, and to show to people the importance of science. And more important to that is that you made us dream today, and an important moment. You know, we go through difficult times, a lot of crises, a lot of problems, and sometimes we need these moments. And this morning, when I was reading a speech from Stephen Hawking that he delivered in Chile quite long ago, I thought that I would finish with a quote from him that would inspire us to be hopeful about the future and will inspire the leaders and the prime ministers and the presidents that are here today in Brussels. He said the following: "Black holes aren't as black as they are painted. They're not eternal prisons as we thought. Things can get out of a black hole, both to the outside and possibly to another universe. So, if you feel you are in a black hole, don't give up. There is always a way out."
Thank you all. Let me also invite you to join us outside, for those who are physically present here today, for the exhibition that we have on the project. And with this, we conclude the press conference. Thank you.
want to find a good because that's the best way to get technology. What they do in these sites, we can. I think we need the new factors so much more. It's very hard to problem. We solved it. Now we move on and we look at another problem. First, we're not talking about the next. If you want to find a good because that's the best way to.
So usually students for pulse of 60.
Das kann nicht sein. Aber das kann nicht sein. Retrograd und Phase On, das kann nicht sein. Das geht nicht.
Everyone has a feeling what black holes should be, but that's really all it is. So far, no one has actually ever seen a black hole. And so we were able for the first time to actually take an image of a black hole and make it visible to everyone.
What you have to do is to build a telescope that's able to see a mustard seed in New York as seen here from Europe. And to do this, you have to create a telescope the size of the world to see something that small as a black hole at a distance of many millions of light years. So what we do is we combine telescopes all over the world into one big telescope, observing at the highest radio frequencies you can observe. And then you can see the shadow of a black hole. I think the funding from Europe made all the difference. It helped us to make a big impact in the entire project and enabled us to do this observation in 2017 smoothly and very swiftly.
So what is most surprising of this experience is that we managed to get a very good image the first time we tried to synchronize all of these telescopes at the same time. It is not so surprising that we obtained the image that we had predicted through simulations because, well, we believe our simulations are correct and because we believe that the theory of Einstein's general relativity is the correct one. This telescope is 100 meters in diameter, but it's not enough. You want a bigger telescope, and of course it's impossible to build, but you can create a virtual telescope by joining different telescopes in different locations, and so you can build a telescope which is as big as the Earth. And in fact, that's exactly what we've done. We joined telescope like this with telescope on the United States, and one even in the South Pole, to get a very sharp image. Actually, an image that is comparable to seeing an orange on the moon. This type of science requires large funding, inevitably, because of the technology that is involved, the manpower that is needed. And this would not have been possible without the contribution of the European community that has allowed us, the European, to play at the same level as our colleagues in Asia and in the United States.
I mean, there are some experiments like this which a person can dream of but will never be able to pull off by him or herself. And so we come together to form this team, and we got the resources from the European Research Council. Without it wouldn't have been impossible. And so by putting the team together, by putting the resources together and working worldwide with our collaborators, this has become possible. It's a really global endeavor at the heart of Europe.
What you have to do is to build a telescope that's able to see a mustard seed in New York as seen here from Europe. And to do this, you have to create a telescope the size of the world to see something that small as a black hole at a distance of many millions of light years. So what we do is we combine telescopes all over the world into one big telescope, observing at the highest radio frequencies you can observe. And then you can see the shadow of a black hole. The very first attempts were made here in Europe in the middle of the 90s. And then the technique developed further. And then 2017, for the first time, we had all the telescopes lined up. And surprisingly, it worked at the very first try. This usually doesn't happen. I think the funding from Europe made all the difference. It helped us to make a big impact in the entire project and enabled us to do this observation in 2017 smoothly and very swiftly. Well, we had the idea 20 years ago, but to realize it, you have to bring the world together, and you have to bring these telescopes together, and you need digital equipment that records a lot of data, and that is actually only possible now. Man muss ein unglaublich scharfes Teleskop bauen, das in der Lage ist, ein Senfkorn in New York von Europa aus zu sehen. Und das macht man, indem man Teleskope auf der ganzen Welt zusammenschaltet und bei den höchsten Radiofrequenzen beobachten lässt. Und dann kann man so etwas sehen wie den Schatten eines schwarzen Lochs. Und das haben wir jetzt zum ersten Mal geschafft. Das ist eine globale, weltweite Zusammenarbeit von Wissenschaftlern. Aber dank der Europäischen Union konnten wir hier Finanzierung haben, die uns wirklich ganz nach vorne gebracht hat und das Experiment 2017 erst möglich gemacht hat. Und das war ein ganz wichtiger Durchbruch für uns. Es hat 20 Jahre gedauert, erst die Idee zu haben, dann die Technik zu entwickeln. Die ersten Beobachtungen wurden hier in Europa von deutschen Wissenschaftlern gemacht. Und dann die ganze Welt zusammenzubringen und dann so viele Daten zusammenzuführen und aufzeichnen zu können. Die Technik ist erst jetzt in den letzten Jahren da gewesen, aufgrund der digitalen Entwicklung. Black holes are this mysterious object that people have been talking about for decades and decades, but we've never seen it before until now. Wat je nodig hebt is een telescoop die in staat is een mosterdzaadje in New York vanuit Nederland te kunnen zien. En om dit telescoop te bouwen moet je radiotelescopen op de hele wereld samen schakelen die bij de hoogste radiofrequenties werken. Die gegevens opslagen, met elkaar samenbrengen. En dan kan je zo'n plaatje maken. Die idee is al 20 jaar geleden geformuleerd, maar je hebt al die telescopen nodig, je moet internationaal samenwerken en je hebt digitale elektronica nodig die heel veel gegevens tegelijkertijd opslaat. En dat is pas nu gelukt. Het is een wereldwijde samenwerking waar de Europeanen een belangrijke rol hebben in gespeeld. En dit is dankzij de Europese Unie. We hadden eigenlijk zonder de EU niet zo'n grote impact kunnen maken. En die waarnemingen in 2017 zijn eigenlijk dankzij de Europese Unie gelukt.
Not all of this light actually goes into the black hole, luckily, and that's why we can produce an image. And we have to compare the image that we simulate through computer programs with the image that we actually measure through observations. Un buco nero attrae materia che accresce su di essa e diventa calda ed emette luce, ma non tutta la luce entra nel buco nero, una parte viene emessa e raggiunge noi osservatori. E quello che facciamo noi è confrontare le immagini prodotte da simulazioni numeriche con codici con le immagini osservate. So what is most surprising of this experience is that we managed to get a very good image the first time we tried to synchronize all of these telescopes at the same time. It is not so surprising that we obtained the image that we had predicted through simulations because, well, we believe our simulations are correct and because we believe that the theory of Einstein's general relativity is the correct one. Quello che è stato sorprendente è che siamo riusciti a produrre questa immagine la prima volta che abbiamo coordinato tutti questi telescopi per fare questa immagine. Era la prima volta, non c'era stato un esercizio precedente e quindi avere l'immagine già molto buona e molto nitida al primo tentativo è stata una sorpresa. Il fatto che poi questa immagine sia in accordo con le nostre predizioni forse è un po' meno in una sorpresa in quanto le nostre predizioni erano estremamente accurate e crediamo che la teoria di Einstein sia la teoria corretta per descrivere i buchi neri. Inner part of the accretion disk, and what you can see there is always this feature of a ring with a blob that is particularly luminous, and also you can see that there is a hole inside, and this is where the light is trapped, it cannot escape. So the light that we see is the one that can manage to come out. But here there is also light, but this light doesn't come to us, actually goes into the black hole.
We wanted to take an image of a black hole, and the problem with black holes is that they are very small. So you want to take a very big black hole, which unfortunately is very far away from us. And so you need a big telescope. This telescope is 100 meters in diameter, but it's not enough. You want a bigger telescope, and of course it's impossible to build, but you can create a virtual telescope by joining different telescopes in different locations, and so you can build a telescope which is as big as the Earth. And in fact, that's exactly what we've done. We joined telescope like this with telescope on the United States, and one even in the South Pole, to get a very sharp image. An image that is comparable to seeing an orange on the moon. Quello che volevamo fare è fare una foto di un buco nero, e ovviamente il problema con questo è che i buchi neri sono estremamente piccoli e quindi bisogna avere un buco nero che è estremamente grande, ma questo è anche un buco nero che è molto lontano da noi, quindi c'è bisogno di un grosso telescopio per visualizzarlo. Un telescopio come questo, che ha un diametro di 100 metri, non è sufficiente, e bisogna avere qualcosa di molto più grande, che ovviamente non si può costruire, però si può creare un telescopio virtuale mettendo in sincronia questo telescopio con altri telescopi in altre parti del pianeta. Infatti si può costruire un telescopio che è così grande quanto il pianeta stesso, ed è quello che abbiamo fatto, mettendo in sincronia telescopi qui in Europa con altri telescopi negli Stati Uniti e uno addirittura al Polo Sud. E in questa maniera abbiamo ottenuto un'immagine estremamente precisa, ad alta risoluzione, di quello che è un buco nero. Black holes tell you that there are regions inside them that cannot be explored, and for a physicist this is very disturbing and attractive at the same time, because we don't like to have doors which we cannot cross, and in particular inside black holes physics is even expected to fail completely, and so this even adds fascination to these objects. So this type of science requires large funding, inevitably, because of the technology that is involved, the manpower that is needed. And this would not have been possible without the contribution of the European community that has allowed us, the European, to play at the same level as our colleagues in Asia and in the United States. So
everyone has a feeling what black holes should be, but that's really all it is. So far, no one has actually ever seen a black hole. And so we were able for the first time to actually take an image of a black hole and make it visible to everyone. Black holes are a prediction of theories of gravity that should absorb everything, including light. And that by definition makes it then difficult to make them visible to us. And yet with that experiment where we look at the center of the galaxies, there we see the black hole as a shadow. And so for the first time we can actually see it. Jeder in der Welt hat vielleicht schon mal von schwarzen Löchern gehört, aber noch niemand hat ein schwarzes Loch gesehen. Und wir waren zum ersten Mal in der Lage, ein schwarzes Loch sichtbar zu machen, für jeden als sichtbares Bild. Schwarze Löcher sind Objekte, die man von der allgemeinen Relativitätstheorie zum Beispiel vorhergesagt hat. Sie sind so dicht, dass sie alles absorbieren, sogar Licht. Und aus diesem Grund hat man noch keines gesehen. Und jetzt zum ersten Mal in der Lage zu sein, ein schwarzes Loch auf diese Art und Weise zu studieren, ist einzigartig. Schwarze Löcher sind zwar laut Einstein sehr einfache Objekte, aber man konnte das bisher noch nie verifizieren. Jetzt sind wir zum ersten Mal in der Lage, so ein schwarzes Loch in allen seinen Seiten sich anzuschauen und damit auch zu schauen, ob die Vorstellung, wie Gravitation funktioniert, auch stimmt. So if you try to look into the center of galaxies, it's usually blocked from view by dust and other stuff. In the radio you can look through, like here today, we can look through rain, you can look through clouds, and so you can look through dust. And with combining radio telescope like this together with other telescopes in the world, you can peer right into the center of the galaxy and see this black hole. Wenn man in das Zentrum von Galaxien reinschaut, hat man normalerweise Staub davor. Und im Optischen kann man also deshalb nicht da reinschauen. Hier im Radio, sieht man auch heute, können wir durch Staub, durch Regen, durch Wolken hindurchschauen. Und so können wir das Zusammenschalten von Teleskopen auf der ganzen Welt, ein hochaufgelöstes Bild vom Zentrum einer solchen Galaxie sichtbar machen und damit auch das schwarze Loch. Yes, I mean there are some experiments like this which a person can dream of but will never be able to pull off by him or herself. And so we come together to form this team, and we got the resources from the European Research Council. Without it wouldn't have been impossible. And so by putting the team together, by putting the resources together and working worldwide with our collaborators, this has become possible. It's a really global endeavor at the heart of Europe. Wenn man eine solche Idee hat, kann man vielleicht alleine davon träumen, aber man braucht ein Team, man braucht die Finanzierung, man braucht die Instrumente und man braucht die richtigen Menschen zusammen. Und hier sind wir zusammengekommen, um dieses Experiment durchzuführen und haben dazu die Hilfe auch vom ERC Council bekommen. Und das hat uns geholfen, global mit den Leuten zusammenzuarbeiten, im Herzen von Europa sozusagen das Projekt anzuführen. So astronomers always have a track record of working together despite what's going on in the world, even during the Cold War or earlier, Einstein and Eddington, even though the First World War was breaking out, they still communicated on relativity and experiments. And so we came also together here. So if we really work together, we can achieve much more than alone. Astronomen haben schon immer zusammengearbeitet, egal was die politische Situation in der Welt war. Im Kalten Krieg oder sogar Eddington und Einstein haben zusammengearbeitet während des Ersten Weltkrieges, um ein Experiment vorzubereiten. Und so haben auch wir uns zusammengefunden, um dieses Experiment vorzubereiten. Gemeinsam können wir halt viel mehr schaffen als alleine.
Piotr Skolimowski, Bloomberg News. Mr. President, one question. First of all, you mentioned that in the context of regular assessment, you will consider whether the preservation of favorable implications requires mitigation of possible side effects on bank intermediation from, understand, from negative rates. You made comments to similar effect at the Watchers Conference recently, and it sparked a lot of speculation that you might be on the cusp of introducing a tiering system. So I would like to know from you whether that's something that's on the menu, that's something that you are considering. That's my first question. And the second is, you also mentioned that we'll get the pricing of TLTROs in the forthcoming meetings. We saw the bank lending survey yesterday. In your assessment, in terms of the loan growth and loan demand, does it give any indication for the conditions that could underpin the incentive scheme for the next TLTROs? Thank you.
Well, I would say to the second question, I would answer it's too early. Just too early. So if you read the statement I just gave, we in a sense give the Governing Council gives the criteria upon which this assessment, both the TLTRO 2, TLTRO 3, and the mitigation of possible side effects would take place, the conditions under which the analysis would be carried out. And it's two conditions. We'll take into account a thorough assessment of the bank-based transmission channel monetary policy, as well as further developments in the economic outlook. So we are looking at that, both things, and right now it's too early to decide about both. I would say the Governing Council was pretty, I would say, we didn't vote, so it's not unanimous or anything, but it was just consensus on the need for further analysis on both issues. And that is, in a sense, includes the first question, because this language echoes what I did say in the ECB Watcher speech. And that's it. We've got to look at that.
Ms. Jones?
And the way we look is well specified here. We look at the functioning of the financial intermediation channel, as I said, the assessment of the bank-based transmission channel of monetary policy, as well as further developments in the economic outlook. So we have to see how the economic outlook will turn out between now and the next monetary policy meeting.
Claire Jones.
I'm sorry, where, by the way, where also we'll be having the new projections. Thank you.
Claire Jones, Financial Times. There seems to have been, over recent months, quite a marked deterioration in the 5-year on 5-year inflation swap rate that suggests markets are becoming more concerned about your ability to hit the inflation target. In the past, the fall in this measure was a trigger for the expansion of QE, the beginning and the expansion of the QE program. So how concerned are you about this time around, and how would you intend to react if this fall continues? And the second topic, we've had some remarks from the US President yesterday saying that he's going to impose tariffs on some European goods. To what extent are you concerned by these remarks, and does it represent a serious risk to the Eurozone economy if this comes about and there's an intensification of the trade relations between Europe and the US? Thank you.
Now, your first question points out to the continued deterioration of inflation expectations over the last several months. And we had quite a substantial analysis of why this is so. It's quite clear that the sliding of the five-year inflation expectations corresponds to a deterioration of the economic outlook. It's also quite clear that as the economic outlook, especially the economic activity, slows down, also we markets expect lesser of a pressure in the labor market, but we haven't seen that yet. So we have underlying strength in the economy, and so we analyzed why this is so. The answer is that the expectations inflation expectations have deteriorated predominantly because of risk premium, or negative risk premium, and which is a big difference with 2016. You may remember that in the early part of 2016, we had a similar deterioration in inflation expectations, but it was different. At that time, it was not so much because of risk premium, but it was a real danger of the anchoring. So this is good news in the sense that it says that expectations are responding to the economic outlook, but are not the anchoring. However, this increase in the negative risk premium might reflect either that market perception that either we don't have instruments, and I think we've shown that we have plenty of instruments. If anything, the market reaction to my ECB Watcher speech last time shows that we have plenty of instruments, and of course that market reaction demonstrated that markets have fully understood our reaction function. Now, the second possibility is that we may well, the markets may think that the Governing Council would tolerate low inflation, too low inflation, without being the anchor, but low. Now, let me just dispel any such impression. Of course, we remain fully committed to return inflation to 2% without undue delay. But also, let me also point out another aspect of this. Our inflation aim doesn't imply a ceiling at 2%. Inflation can deviate from our objective in both directions, so long as the path of inflation converges to our medium-term objective. Now, the second question is about this threat of tariffs from President Trump to the Europeans. Of course, we listed the threat of protectionism as one of the potential factors dampening growth in the euro area and elsewhere in the world, as a matter of fact. So this is not different from this viewpoint. It would certainly, well, we have to see, first of all, what happens, because as you've seen in the past, between words and deeds, there is often a big gulf. But certainly, even the fact that these threats are being vented with some frequency is certainly undermine general confidence, and there is no question about the fact that one of the reasons for the general weakness in the Eurozone, but I believe also elsewhere in the world, is due to the confidence weakening that has come from various threats, various vulnerabilities, a combination of effects, but certainly also from these threats of further protectionist measures.
Mr. Sims?
Hi, Tom Sims from Reuters. So am I correct to assume that and understand that you did discuss the precise terms of the TLTRO at today's meeting? The reason I ask is because the June meeting would come just days after you have a new chief economist on board, meaning much of the preparatory work would have to have been done by a predecessor. So do you see the Governing Council putting off any decision on TLTRO until Mr. Lane comes in? That would be in July, at the July meeting, I guess. And a second question on the tiered rate deposit issue. Did you discuss the merits of this at today's meeting? And might we see this on the agenda of the Governing Council during your tenure?
Thank you. I mean, we certainly welcome Philip Lane. Is a great addition to our team. But it's not that we actually put in our calendar our decision-making depending on who's going to be on board or not. So let me just separate the two things. You asked me whether we discussed the TLTRO deal. No, we didn't. And I said this in the beginning. We will discuss it on it does say, will be details on the precise terms of new series of targeted long-term refinancing operations will be communicated at one of our forthcoming meetings. So the pricing of new TLTROs will take into account, and I gave the two criteria before, but we haven't discussed that today. On the second question, no, either. We haven't discussed the merits or the cons of mitigating measures. I don't want to identify that with a specific word, and I never did. So it's we started a process where we will analyze all measures, and specifically the two that I mentioned in the introductory statement. This analysis is based on these two criteria, and that's it. We need further information. We need further information that will come to us between now and June, and in a sense, the projections that we'll have in June by the staff of the ECB will be an important part of this information set.
Mr. Plickert?
Having said that, Philip Lane is a fantastic addition to our team. Thank you.
Mr. Draghi, another question from me on the issue of deposit rates. Perhaps you can comment on the claims or the numbers which have been given by the head of the German Banking Association. He claimed that the European banks are at a disadvantage of even 50 billion vis-à-vis the American banks. It's well known that the European banks, they pay around 7.5 billion on the negative deposit rate. And he claimed, and when looking to the US, you see they even get a positive rate for their deposits of about 40 billion. So he calculated like a 50 billion difference, and that's a big disadvantage. And this is a drag on the European banking system. What's your reply on this?
Well, I take note of the fact. It's a fact, and by the way, so we asked ourselves, how much is overall profitability of banks being affected by the negative deposit rate? And we are actually in the process of carrying out this analysis. But if you compare profitability of our banks, I mean, Eurozone banks, by the way, we're talking about large aggregates to the point of being meaningless, because the way this negative deposit rate affects different banking institutions is very different. Banks are profoundly different between them, their business models. So, but in the aggregate, we see that profitability of Eurozone banks is by and large like the ones in Japan, higher than in the UK, where there is no negative rate, and of course lower than in the United States. So, and then of course, but I did say in my ECB Watcher speech that, so we look at this, we'll look as it says here. We'll also consider whether the preservation of the favorable implications of the negative rates, because we want these implications. The market reaction to my ECB Watcher speech basically made clear the markets understood our reaction function. And it says favorable implications of the economy requires the mitigation of their possible side effects, if any, on bank intermediation. So we'll look at that.
Ms. Laird?
Thank you. Laurie Laird, MT Newswires. Mr. Draghi, your forward guidance has been very clear, but it hasn't had any conditions. You've never articulated any conditions that would imply a change in that forward guidance. Can you give us any clarification on that, please, particularly on the downside? And also, have there been any discussions, even in a theoretical sense, about whether, if there's a resumption of QE, could equities or would equities have to be part of that program, given the limits on bond buying?
Well, really, the second question, we haven't discussed that. What the Governing Council did today was to assess the outlook, which is a weakening picture of weakening growth, to reiterate confidence in the of the inflation path based on a series of factors, and then reiterate the readiness to use all the possible and necessary, all the instruments that are necessary to cope with the contingencies that come ahead. And this was, I would say, unanimous. And this deliberation to use all the instruments, it was not the time. I did say something at the beginning. This time is not the right time to say, to be sort of, I don't like this instrument, or I'd rather prefer another one. We are not yet there. And once we will be approaching that point with the information coming from about the economy and inflation, we will be better positioned to see whether further action is needed beyond. By the way, let's not forget, that our forward guidance has indeed, in the past few months, automatically responded to the weakening economic conditions. And let's not forget also that this forward guidance is chained with the horizon over which we'll carry out the repurchases of the bonds. As you see, it says, we intend to continue reinvesting in full the principal payments for maturing securities purchased under the asset purchase program for an extended period of time, past the date when we start raising the key ECB interest rates. So whenever the date when we raise ECB interest rates moves forward, so does the horizon over which we'll actually undertake the purchases, and in any case for as long as necessary to maintain favorable liquidity conditions and an ample degree of monetary accommodation. So you see that in the existing toolbox, in the existing and enacting toolbox, we already have optionality to extend the existing instruments. But with the statement today, the Governing Council also said that it's plainly open to use all instruments that would be required by the needed contingency as we gather further and further information.
Ms. Weisbach?
Annette Weisbach, CNBC. I have a question. In the minutes, or the minutes actually, are suggesting that some Governing Council members were not really happy to adjust the forward guidance on rates according to what the market thinks. And some analysts call it backward guidance. You can't be happy with that. So could we get an update on the rates forward guidance as soon as June? And the second question...
Sorry, what is the question?
The question is that the minutes... The accounts. They are suggesting that...
That's okay. You are forgiven for this.
Don't worry, I can learn it. They are suggesting that some members of the Governing Council are not happy to align the forward guidance on rates with what the market expectations are, so to extend it further in the future. My question is, they call it backward guidance, which can't be what you would like them to think. So do you think it's realistic to assume that we get some more of an alignment in the forward guidance on rates as soon as June or perhaps in the forthcoming meetings? And the second question would be, how big is the risk of a recession for the Eurozone? Thank you.
As you've probably seen, you must have seen from the accounts, there were other members that actually wished much more extended forward guidance. So this is part of natural discussions we have. And again, like for the other instruments that we briefly mentioned before, we didn't discuss this. It was not, in a sense, that if I have to characterize this meeting, it was not an operational meeting. It was more of a meeting that would characterize the stance of the Governing Council towards further action. In other words, people are acknowledging, Governing Council members are acknowledging the weakening of the cycle, the weakening of the economy, the fact that this weakening will extend into the rest of the year, the weakening of inflation. In fact, I just said that the inflation will probably bottom in September. They acknowledge the sliding of inflation expectations. At the same time, they acknowledge also the underlying strength of the economy, the fact that some of these temporary factors are unwinding. And so it was just it was a meeting where the main goal of which was to reassert the readiness to act if the contingencies would warrant so. And again, as we move towards June, where the new projections will be available, we'll be gathering more and more information. The estimated probabilities of a recession remain low. Again, there is a difference with 2016, and so that's what we see now. It's still a relatively low probability. You may remember, no, I don't think you would, but in my ECB Watcher speech, I gave a number of, I think there have been 56 soft patches in the last 50 years of the Eurozone, and only 4 recessions. So for what it's worth, really, because that's historical evidence looking at the past. But overall, probabilities of a recession, also implied financial probabilities of a recession, remain on the low side, and certainly less than the same probabilities would look like in past recessions. In other words, in the previous episodes of recession, we would have seen much higher probability of an oncoming recession than what we see today. But as I said, the Governing Council stands ready to adjust all of its instruments as appropriate if that contingency were to materialize.
Mr. Bufacchi?
Isabella Bufacchi, Sole 24 Ore. Mr. President, I have two questions. One question is on the mitigation of side effects of negative rates, if any. Are you comfortable with the markets that might read into this, whether there is any measure, a signal on forward guidance, in the sense that if there are less side effects for banks, then negative interest rates might stay for longer? And so are you comfortable with the market maybe be reading into it too much? And on the fact that you are looking at two measures on banks, one on tiered system for deposits on negative rates, and the other on TLTROs, does this indicate somehow that there is a risk that the excess liquidity is somehow trapped into the national banking systems, and that there is not enough cross-border lending, and that because these two measures are good for some banks in one case and for some other banks in another case? Thank you.
Well, let's start with the second question. Clearly, we would wish to have much more cross-border lending than we have, but this is also a part of the ongoing discussion on creating on finishing with the banking union and creating a capital markets union. It doesn't come out naturally. However, what we are observing is that in some countries where credit growth is especially significant, part of this growth can be explained by the participation of banks, especially large banks, to syndicated loans that actually get used in other parts other than their countries where these banks are established. So we see some cross-border lending. And in relation to the TLTRO, no, I don't think the liquidity gets necessarily trapped in the countries. Now, the other question was whether one would associate the presence of mitigating measures with a lengthening of the period during which interest rates remain negative or not. I don't know. I have the sense that you are right, that markets perceive this way. I don't know what to say, really, because it's a fact that we had negative rates now for many years, and there were no mitigating measures. It's also a fact that the impact of negative rates, it's very different when they start and then when they've been in place for a long period of time. So we also have to assess that. And it's not necessarily, well, that's what I want to say. It's, I don't have other things to add to that.
Mr. Fallis?
Thank you. Tom Fallis from the Wall Street Journal. I had a follow-up question on what you were just saying. You talked about the market reaction function to your speech at the Watchers Conference. Does this mean that mitigating negative rates would open the door to a rate cut? Would you be able to cut rates deeper? Because if such a system were in place, and by how much do you think? And how much would the lower bound fall? And the second question is on what you said about the 2% inflation ceiling, how 2% isn't a ceiling. Does that mean that you'd be happy to overshoot or aim to overshoot? Thanks.
Well, on your second question, I will answer saying exactly the same thing. We don't tolerate too low inflation. We remain fully committed to using all necessary instruments to return inflation to 2% without undue delay. Likewise, our inflation aim doesn't imply a ceiling at 2%. Inflation can deviate from our objective in both directions, so long as the path of inflation converges towards our medium-term objective. And I believe I must have said something close to this or something to this extent a few other times in the past few years. The other question is this. I mean, many of your questions could be captured by the following question. If you are to introduce mitigating measures for banks, for the side effects of negative interest rates on banks' profitability, would this imply low rates for longer or lower negative rates? Well, we haven't discussed that. We haven't discussed the introduction of mitigating measures. We said that we want to analyze the side effects and possibly the mitigating measures. So we are not even discussing the first stage of this reasoning, not to mention what this would imply.
Philippe Lacour.
Philippe Lacour, Agence France Presse. Oh, yes.
Let me just restate one thing, that the market reaction to the ECB Watcher speech, whether it was linked to this part or to another part, showed that markets understand our reaction function. Please.
Mr. President, so Agence France Presse, Philippe Lacour. One question on the Brexit, if I may. Since there are signs in favor of a longer Brexit today, if so European Council decide this direction, could you maybe cautiously say something or welcome this possible solution? And I want to remind you, sub-question to this, what you said here in January is that the Brexit thing will not affect the EU economy that much. Would you state the same thing today? That is my question to Brexit. And the second one is more on the European elections coming in the end of May. With possibility of nationalism or populist parties rising. So it is the capacity or ability of the ECB or the national central banks to intervene somewhat in the debate and promote the idea of Europe, which is embodied in Euro. So in the coming weeks. Thank you.
Thank you. Answering the second question first. The central banks usually don't intervene in the political debate. Central banks can, on occasion, and especially the ECB, can certainly defend the European framework and point out to the ways to improve on it, to complete on it, to remedy to the weaknesses that the recent experience and not so recent have shown. But I don't think central bankers would be right to intervene in a political debate, either in the European context or in a national context. I think I gave two speeches of recent, one in Bologna and the other one in Pisa, both focusing on the one in Bologna especially, focusing on the fact that in this globalized world, where challenges are global, we got to be together to be truly sovereign, to be truly masters of our own destinies. Because on our own, we would have no way to cope with these global challenges. And we have, I mean, the evidence is in front of our eyes every day. And in Pisa, the speech was more oriented to explain why the euro has been a very positive experience, and at the same time, to identify the weaknesses of the present situation and what we should do to make sure that the benefits of the euro and Europe in general are distributed to everybody. On the Brexit thing, I think the consequences of a Brexit are different, whether it's a hard, disorderly Brexit, or whether it's a properly managed and with an adequate transition period. So for me, again, 2 days, whatever, before the vote, they're having vote every day. So, but just it would not be right to anticipate one thing or another. What is clear, however, is that the whole discussion on Brexit, which has lasted now many years, really, is part and parcel of the overall uncertainty that is hanging over our continent, and I think is hanging over the UK as well. It's probably unavoidable of any very important political discussion, but that's a fact for our economies. Also, to be looked with attention on the real implications of the Brexit on the real economy. As I've said many times, in the aggregate, if you take the aggregate numbers, you don't see. You wouldn't expect much of an impact given the relative size of the two entities. But there are two important caveats to that. One is that certain countries are especially exposed to the UK economy, and of course they will have consequences, and the consequences may be serious. And their serious consequences are bound to reverberate on the rest of the continent. The second caution is that the value chains are very extensive, and the ramifications of value chains are also quite broad. So if we are to reach a point where these value chains, which is not at all to be taken for granted, by the way, but if we are to reach a point where these value chains were to be broken, then we can have lots of local and possibly serious effects. But again, I'm still hopeful.
Ms. Wackett?
Julia Wackett, Börsenzeitung. I have a question regarding your home country, Italy, because yesterday they cut again the growth forecasts, and a lot of economists are very worried about Italy, that in the next recession Italy will face serious troubles because they will probably have to save and don't have the fiscal capacity to counteract in a recession. So how worried are you about Italy? And also, again, about the decision from yesterday to appoint Yves Mersch as for the supervisory mechanism. Is there already who will replace Yves Mersch in his position at the ECB? So will Ms. Lautenschläger take over Yves Mersch's role? Or yeah, thank you.
Thank you. The data on the Italian economy didn't come as a surprise. There had been already downgrades in the forecast, in the growth forecast for Italy and for the rest of the Eurozone, as a matter of fact. And so from this viewpoint, it's not a surprise. It's quite clear that the priority there is to restore growth and employment. And Italy knows how to do it. It's very important that these priorities are being pursued without causing an increase in interest rates, because increases in interest rates are contractionary. So I think it's in simple words, that should be the aim of economic policy now, there. On your second point is, yes, Mr. Mersch has been appointed by the Governing Council, Vice Chair of the SSM. It's again another great addition to the SSM team, and the Governing Council was pleased by that choice. So we have now a different, you asked me about who's doing, the portfolios. Mr. Mersch will remain responsible for legal, and the distribution of portfolios will be given, I think, immediately after the press conference on our website. But I can anticipate that some of the rest of Mr. Mersch's portfolios and some of Mr. Curré's portfolio will go to Ms. Lauterschläger. So it's a rearrangement, different combinations. Thank you.
Mr. Heitner?
Luke Heighton, Market News. Mr. Draghi, Olli Rehn has called for a re-examination of the monetary policy framework, something the Fed is already doing. Would price level targeting be one possible measure the ECB could adopt? My second question was, according to the account, rather than the minutes of last month's monetary policy meeting, it was highlighted that growth might not be mean reverting, as typically assumed in projections. Do you think this reinforces the need for such a re-evaluation?
Reinforces what?
Reinforces the need for such a re-evaluation, as suggested by Mr. Rehn.
You're asking me a very difficult question, which has not been addressed by the Council, and we have to see exactly what it means, where it's driving, whether it's justified or not. So we have to see. It's just one statement. But having said that, I mean, the Fed is embarking in a revisitation of the monetary policy framework, and again, we have to see what's going to come out of that. These are not processes that can be discussed in one or two meetings. So it may take several months.
Mr. Ewing?
Jack Ewing, New York Times. Mr. Draghi, you mentioned a couple of minutes ago the benefits of cross-border banking. As you know, there's a discussion about a big banking consolidation here in Frankfurt. I'm sure you don't want to speak about specific banks, but as a general principle, would it perhaps be more beneficial for banks to be looking for mergers across border rather than creating bigger domestic banks? And a related question, I wonder if you can tell us anything about what role the ECB as banking supervisor might play when there's a major banking consolidation in terms of oversight. For example, would you be seeking perhaps require banks to raise more capital or even try to block a merger if you thought it was unwise? I wonder if you can tell us generally what the ECB's approach will be. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, the role of a supervisor, second question, the role of a supervisor when witnessing mergers is one where you want to make sure that the transaction is successful. And to be successful means that that not only pleases the shareholders, but actually it creates an entity which is strong and capable of coping with the various challenges. I think that's the role of the supervisor is not necessarily one where it wants to address or the agents towards a certain direction, but just unless the direction they've chosen is leading to a suboptimal outcome. The first question was about cross-border lending, cross-border mergers. I don't think there is a clear preference to, I don't think that's my own view. There isn't a clear preference towards having one or the other. What is pretty clear, however, is that the banking system in Europe is overcrowded. The need for consolidation is very, very significant. And part of the structural weakness of the banking system in Europe is caused by this overcapacity in banking, which is not overcapacity in the sense that it's a little production of credit. It's overcapacity in terms of number of people, number of branches, costs. We're talking about countries where there are banks that have a cost-income ratio of over 80–90%. And they even quarrel about negative deposit rates as being one of the causes of their lack of profitability. I think I'd rather think about this. I'd rather think about low level of digitalization. And I think there are a series of actions that improve the business model, rationalize the business model, that can be achieved, however, only through consolidation. So there is an issue about there is a relationship between scale and the capacity to undertake the investments that are needed to improve technology and be competitive, especially in certain business models. I wouldn't argue that all business models are like that, but certainly in some of them, this is the situation.
Mr. Smith?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Jeffrey Smith from investing.com. You talked about the toolbox that you've got, but you've had 10 years of LTROs, TLTROs, negative rates, quantitative easing. You're still not at 2%. You're still not even really close to it. If anything, your core inflation rate is still trending downwards slightly. What makes you think that the same toolkit will get you to 2% in the future? Aren't you going to need something that you haven't even yet dreamt up?
Well, let me just say that it's not 10 years. First, it's several years we've been having this in place, and we've changed the instruments. And frankly, the outcome, the results of our monetary policy action is in front of our eyes. 10 more million jobs. You may remember how the situation was in 2015, 2014, 2012. So we had to cope with a series of crises really produced by the great and part of the great financial crisis. The improved conditions all across the board are a testimony that our action has been quite effective. The issue that you are mentioning is that we don't see inflation going to our objective as fast as we had expected. And there are reasons for that. And we mentioned what the reasons are, and we mentioned that the risks are tilted on the downside. Does it mean that we ought to raise interest rates in the meantime, since our rates so far have not produced any outcome? Of course, the answer is no. Our monetary policy has been quite effective. As a matter of fact, it's one of the reasons why we are confident that the inflation rate will converge to our objectives. If we didn't have that monetary policy, we would still be less confident. If we are to raise interest rates, we would become less confident of such an outcome. So the ECB has done a lot to that. The environment proved much more challenging than was expected, say, 3 years ago. In 2017, world growth was more buoyant. Exports, especially the external component, is what's weighing on growth now. And that is not going to be last. Actually, we see signs of stabilization. So that's the way I would answer your point.
The final question today to Mr. Fiedler from Galileo.
Hello, my name is Matthias Fiedler from ProSieben Galileo. How does the ECB's financial policy affect on my life, on the life of our viewers?
Well, I think what the outcome of our discussions this basically determines how cheap is, or how expensive is, to borrow money. And nowadays interest rates are very low, which means that borrowing is cheap, which means that you can borrow money to buy a house or a car or other consumption goods more easily. Same thing for companies. Companies, they can borrow more easily to buy machines, equipment. This means that they will create jobs. And in due time, this means, and we are seeing it, that wages will go up. And when wages are actually going up, and going up finally, and well-deservedly in all countries, but of course especially in Germany. And this in due time will produce also a price increase, and prices will go up. That's what we do. That's what we look at. Thank you. Oh, before we say each other goodbye, I wish to acknowledge the one thing. This was the last monetary policy meeting for Peter Pratt. Peter, usually what happens is that Peter comes in, and the day before he presents a vast, ample, and quite detailed explanation of the economic outlook, going from the rest of the world and then zeroing on Europe gradually. And then the day after, he presents his views on what sort of monetary policy action we should consider, undertake, analyze, or anything like that. Much of what I say in the press conferences and what I read in the introductory statement has been based on his work, on the work that he and his staff and the team and the rest of the ECB does with him. And so I would like to take this opportunity to express my deepest thanks to him. Thank you.